Mga kaibigan, welcome po sa 89.6 UC Law Radio. Itanong mo sa ating tax expert lawyers kasama si Attorney Garado at ating mga bisita po ngayon ng iba't ibang backgrounds. Pipresent po natin sila mamaya-maya. We're going to be talking about tonight organizational structure, powers and duties of the BAR at syempre yung usaping prescriptive periods. Wini-welcome po natin sa ating radio show, Attorney GOROSPE, one of the biggest law firms dyan po sa Metro Manila. Hello, Attorney GOROSPE.
Good evening po sa lahat.
And yun, alam niyo ma'am, meron nagpapahay sa inyo rito. Pakihelo kay Attorney GOROSPE at dadaling ko ang aking mga tax documents sa kanya tomorrow. Rito.
Sige, subukan nating ayusin.
Yan, di ba? Ayusin mo kasama sa Attorney GOROSPE. At kasama sa under the office of Senator RAFFY Tulfo, mga kaibigan Attorney Garrett, Attorney RAFFY de Guzman.
Good evening po sa inyo. I'll be representing Attorney Garrett po kasi kasama ni Idol na yun eh.
At kapapanalo lang po ng isang napakalaking tax case laban sa San Miguel Corporation. We're talking about millions, millions and millions at napakaraming personalities na involved dito, mga senador at ibang mga celebrities. Attorney LIDA, mga kaibigan.
Yes, mabuhay po sa ating mga listeners. Thank you for being with us today. Hopefully may matutunan kayo sa amin. Thank you.
At ito naman po, yung maraming mga cases dito na pro bono na binibigay mismo kasi ang kanyang advocacy when it comes sa magbayad ng mga taxes. Attorney LEONORA MANIWAG. Hello, Attorney.
Thank you, Sir at William. Hi there.
Salamat po. At alam po namin, mga hawak niyo mga dormitories. Dormitories at iba't ibang mga malalaking mga buildings. Anyway, sa may mga katanungan po dyan, you can actually, bring your queries. We are being watched live online sa YouTube, sa ating official Facebook account, sa ating Facebook page, mismo ng ating radio station. At we are being heard all over the Philippines. Ito pong itanong mo sa ating tax expert lawyer sa 89.6 UC Law Radio. Isang katanungan dito, Attorney, pwede mo bang ibalik sa atin yung isang kaso about fitness by design versus CIR? At pwede po nating bigyan po ng baliktanaw po ito. Anong nangyari po dito mismong yung company ng fitness by design, naka-receive po siya ng final notice ng assessment galing mismo sa internal revenue. At pinapakita po dito yung kanyang revenue tax liabilities for the year 1995. At sabi nga po ng fitness by design, filed a protest, said notice, pleading prescription. At ang kanyang answer, claiming na yung right to assess had not yet prescribed. Why? Because yung 1995 income tax return filed by the company was actually, false and fraudulent, first alleged. Ito yung sinasabi ng BIR. Yung na-file na tax return mismo ng fitness by design ay false, fraudulent. Why? Because for the alleged failure to reflect its true sales. Ano nga bang issue ang pinag-usapan po dito? Whether or not fraud may be presumed. At ang sabi ng korte, no, hindi po pwede. Ang tinatawag na prescriptive period in making an assessment depends upon whether a tax return was filed or whether the tax return filed was either false or fraudulent. Now, when a tax return that is neither false or fraudulent has been filed, yung BIR may assess within 3 years, reckoned from the date of actual filing or from the last day prescribed by law for filing. On the other end, in case of a false or fraudulent return with intent to evade tax, it may assess at any time within 10 years, hindi 3 years. After discovery of the falsity, fraud, or omission. Yung fraud na tinatawag is a question of fact that should be alleged at kailangan patunayan sa korte. Yung willful neglect to file the required tax return or the fraudulent intent to evade the payment of taxes, considering the same is accompanied by legal consequences, cannot be presumed. Fraud, ang sabi ng korte, entails corresponding sanctions under the tax law. Therefore, it is indispensable for the Commissioner of Internal Revenue to include the basis for allegations of fraud sa assessment notice. Attorney Garado, paano naman yung kaso ng CIR versus Raul M. Gonzalez? Meron ba siyang connection dito? Ang nangyari po rito, mga kaibigan, yung BIR, conducted yung tinatawag na fraud investigation sa tax liabilities ng LM Camus Engineering Corporation for the years 1997, 1998, and 1991. 1997, 1998, and 1999, following a letter of authority issued by the Commissioner of Internal Revenue. The investigation was initiated based on a particular information. Galing sa isang informant na nag-allege na nag-underdeclare daw po ng kanyang income ang LMEC. Kaya nga po, isang criminal complaint was filed against the company for failure to comply with a subpoena duces tecum. Yung tinatawag na isa po tong writ ordering a person to attend a court and bring relevant documents during the investigation. At based on the findings ng BIR, yung LMEC, meron po siyang hindi binayaran na taxes amounting to more than 430 million pesos for the mentioned periods na 3 taon. Pero ang sabi po ng company, ang sabi sa isang banda, sa Secretary of Justice ng tayo, ang sabi ng Secretary of Justice ruled against yung decision ng BIR, arguing na yung tax fraud investigation lacked clear establishment of the informant's role, accusing yung BIR of engaging in the so-called fishing expedition in violating Section 235 of the National Internal Revenue Code, which allows only one examination and inspection per taxable year. Ano naman ang issue rito? Yung main issue rito was whether the information obtained by the BIR, particularly from the informer and third parties, ay valid. At ang sabi ng Supreme Court, yung revenue officers daw were denied the opportunity to examine yung records mismo ng company directly. Kaya nga po, they lawfully gather information from third parties as authorized by Section 5 of the NIRC. Now, the lack of consent from the taxpayer under investigation does not imply illegal acquisition of information or its falsity. The absence of consent also does not hinder the BIR from assessing deficiency taxes based on the obtained documents. The Supreme Court went on to explain that yung LMEC, yung company, cannot evade criminal prosecution under Sections 254 and 255 of the NIRC by challenging the legitimacy of the informer. The court upheld the BIR's right to maintain na hindi ipakilala mismo yung identity ng informer and other personal details. At ngayon po, ano naman po, attorney, yung tinatawag na prescriptive periods? Tatanungin po natin yan mula kay Attorney GOROSPE.
Good evening po everyone at saka sa mga nanonood. So in here, yung napunta sa aking case ay yung kay Talento versus Escalada. Ang issue here is whether the collection of taxes may be suspended by reason of the filing of an appeal and posting a surety bond is undoubtedly a pure question of law. In here, yung doctrine that the taxes are the lifeblood of the government. Without it, it cannot be properly perform its functions. And that appeal shall not be the appeal shall not suspend the collection of realty taxes. However, there is an exception to the foregoing rule, where the taxpayer has shown a clear and unmistakable right to refuse or to hold in abeyance the payment of taxes. So in the instant case, the respondent here contested the revised assessment on the following grounds. First is the subject assessment pertain to the properties that have been previously declared, that the assessment covered periods of more than 10 years, which is not allowed under the local government code, that the fair market value or replacement cost used by petitioner included items which should be properly excluded, that prompt payment of discounts were not considered in determining the fair market value, and that the subject assessment should take effect a year after or on January 2008. So it was held in this court that the resolution of these issues would have a direct bearing on the assessment made by the petitioner. Hence, it is necessary that the issues must first be passed upon before the properties of respondent is sold in public auction. In addition to the fact that the issues raised by the respondent would have a direct impact on the validity on the assessment made by the petitioner. So they also noted that the respondent has posted a surety bond equivalent to the amount of the assessment due. So in here, they listed the effect of appeal on collection of taxes. It is written under the rules of procedure of the LBAA, particularly Section 7 and Rule 5. So it provided that the amount of the bond must not be less than the total realty taxes and penalties due as assessed by the assessor, nor more than double of the said amount. That the bond must be accompanied by a certification from the insurance commissioner that the surety is duly authorized to issue such bond, that surety bond is approved by and registered with the said commission, and that the amount covered with the surety bond is within the writing capacity of the surety company, that the amount of the bond in excess of the surety company's writing capacity, if any, must be covered by the reinsurance binder, in which case a certification to this effect must likewise accompany the surety bond. So in here, no appeal taken to the Court of Appeals from the collector of the Internal Revenue. It shall be suspended by the payment, levy, restraint, or sale of any property for the satisfaction of his tax liability as provided by the existing law. Provided, however, that when in the opinion of the court, the collection of the aforementioned government agencies may jeopardize the interests of the government or the taxpayer, the court at any stage of the processing may suspend the collection and require the taxpayer either to deposit the amount claim or to file a surety bond for not more than the double amount with the court. So, ano naman yung BPI versus the CIR? So in here, ang issue lang din dito is whether a request for reconsideration of the assessment suspend the prescriptive period for the BIR to collect. In here, the court held that hindi pwede kasi a request for reconsideration does not suspend the running of the prescriptive period for the BIR to collect taxes. The court ruled in the number of cases that a request for reconsideration or reinvestigation by the taxpayer without a valid waiver of the prescriptive periods for the assessment and collection of tax as required by the tax code and implementing rules will not suspend the running. So the agreement described in the aforequoted provisions are often referred to as waivers of the statute of limitations. The waiver of the statute of limitations, whether on assessment or collection, should not be construed as a waiver of the right to invoke the defense of prescription, but rather an agreement between the taxpayer and the BIR to extend the period to a date certain within which the latter could still assess or collect taxes due. The waiver does not mean that the taxpayer relinquishes the right to invoke prescription unequivocally. So this is a simple case wherein the respondent BIR commissioner and the other BIR officials failed to act promptly in resolving and denying the request for reconsideration filed by the BPI in enforcing the collection on assessment. They presented no reason or no explanation as to why it took them almost 8 years to address the protest of petitioner BPI. So the statute on limitations imposed by the tax code precisely intends to protect the taxpayer from such prolonged and unreasonable assessment and investigation by the BII. So, for my last case, ito kay CIR versus kay Stanley Works Incorporated. Ang issue lang dito is whether a waiver is a unilateral act of the taxpayer or the BIR. So in here, a waiver is not a unilateral act of the taxpayer or the BIR, but is a bilateral agreement between the two parties to extend the period to a date certain. Hence, the BIR must act on it either by conforming to or by disagreeing with the extension. So a waiver of the statute of limitations, whether on assessment or collection, should not be construed as a waiver of the right to invoke the defense of prescription, but rather an agreement between the taxpayer and the BIR to extend the period to other date certain within which the the latter could still assess or collect tax due. The waiver does not imply that the taxpayer relinquishes the right to invoke prescription unequivocally. So since the waiver in this case is defective and therefore invalid, it produces no effect. Thus, the prescriptive period for collecting deficiency income tax for the taxable year 1989 was never suspended or tolled.
Attorney Gorospe, merong isang mahalagang kaso na itinanong sa inyo kanina, no, ng listener sa inyong messenger. Ano bang kaso yan, Attorney Gorospe?
Meron pang isang pahabol. So, patungkol na naman to sa 5 years, 3 years ng collection of internal revenue sa statute of limitations. So, again, i ano ko siya sa case na alam ko, which is yung CIR versus the United Salvage and Towage. In here, the statute of limitations on assessment and collection of national internal revenue taxes was shortened from 5 years to 3 years by virtue of Batas Pambansa Bilang 700. Thus, itong si petitioner has 3 years from the date of actual filing of the tax return to assess a national internal revenue tax or to commence court proceedings for the collection thereof without an assessment. However, when it validly issues an assessment within 3-year period, it has another 3 years within which to collect the tax due by distraint, levy, or court proceeding. The assessment of the tax is deemed made and the 3-year period for the collection of the assessed tax begins to run on the date the assessment notice had been released, mailed, or sent to the taxpayer. So no evidence was formally offered to prove when the United Salvage and Towage filed its returns and paid the corresponding taxable year 1992. So nevertheless, as correctly held by the CTAN Bank, the preliminary collection letter for the deficiency taxes for taxable year 1992 was only issued on February 2002, despite the fact that the deficiency for taxable year 1992 was issued as clearly as January 1996. So clearly, yung 5 long years had already lapsed beyond the 3 years prescriptive period before the collection was pursued by the petitioner. So further, while the request for a reinvestigation was made on March 1997, the same was only acted upon by the petitioner on January 2001. Also beyond 3 years statute limitations reckoned from January 1996, notwithstanding the lack of impediment to rule upon such issue. So, the right of the government to collect tax does not prescribe. However, in fairness to the taxpayer, the government should be stopped from collecting the tax where it failed to make the necessary investigation and assessment within the 5-year after the filing of the return, and where it failed to collect the tax within 5 years from the date of assessment thereof. Just as the government is interested in the stability of its collections, so also are the taxpayers entitled to an assurance that they will not be subjected to further investigation for tax purposes after the expiration of a reasonable period of time. So,
Ligayang pakikinig po ang ating mga kababagong pasa sa bar examination batch 2023. Congratulations. At magkakaroon po ng testimonial dinner ang UC College of Law happening next week Friday sa Newtown Plaza Hotel. Ayan. Congratulations po. At marami po nagtatanong dito tungkol sa prescriptive periods at bibigyan po tayo ng kalinawan kagaya ng narinig po nating Attorney Gorospe. Attorney Maniwag, magandang gabi po, Attorney.
Thank you, Sir William. Now, in the case of BPI versus CIR, the petitioner's BPI is Commercial Banking Corporation, organized and existing under the laws of the Philippines on two separate occasions, particularly on June 6, 1985 and 14/1985, it sold United States a $500,000 to Central Bank of the Philippines. Now, on October 1989, the Bureau of Internal Revenue issued assessment number 85/00254, finding petitioner BPI liable for deficiency of DST on its aforementioned sales of foreign bills of exchange to the central bank. Now, the total all in all is the amount due and collectible is 28,020 pesos. In petitioner, BPI received the assessment together with the attached assessment notice on October 20, 1989. Now, the issue here is whether the $1,000 June 6, 1985 and 14 June 1985 by petitioners BPI to the central bank were subject to documentary stamp tax. The ruling of the Supreme Court in this case that there being no dispute that the petitioner filed its protest on the subject assessment on November 17, 1989, and there can be no conclusion other than that said protest stopped the running of the prescriptive period of the commissioner to collect. Since in Section 320 of the Tax Code clearly states that a request for investigation, which is granted by the commissioner, shall suspend the prescriptive period to collect. The underscored portion above does not mean that the commissioner will cancel the subject assessment, but should be construed as when the same was entertained by the commissioner by not using any warrant of distraint or levy on the properties of the taxpayer or any action prejudicial to the latter unless and until the request for investigation is finally given due course. Now, next case is CIR versus FNF Development Corporation. In the facts of this case is FNF filed a protest against this notice with the BIR and requested for a reconsideration or investigation on February 9, 1999. Now, the FMF President Enrique Fernandez executed a waiver of 3-year period prescriptive period for the BIR to assess internal revenue taxes, hence extending the assessment period until October 31, 1991. The waiver was accepted and signed by the Revenue District. So therefore, the issue in this case is whether the waiver is valid, and the other one is whether the 3-year period to assess internal revenue taxes already prescribed. Now, in the issue of waiver is valid, applying RMO number 20-90, the waiver in question was defective and did not valid extend the original 3-year prescriptive period. First, it was not proven that the respondent was furnished a copy of BIR accepted waiver. Second, the waiver was signed only by Revenue District Officer when it should have been signed by the Commissioner as mandated by the NIRC. And RM 20-90, considering that the case involves an amount of more than 1 million and the period to assess is not about to prescribe. Now, last, it did not contain the date of acceptance by the Commissioner of Internal Revenue as a request necessary to determine whether the waiver was validly accepted before the expiration of the original 3 years period. In the issue of another issue, number 2, that is the assessment notice dated October 25, 1999 was issued beyond the 3 years prescriptive period. The waiver was incomplete or defective, and thus the 3-year prescriptive period was not told nor extended and continued to run until April 15, 1999. So even the 3-year period be counted from 1996, May 8, the date of filing of the amended return, assuming the amended return was substantially different from the original return. A case which affects the reckoning point of the prescriptive period is still the subject's assessment is definitely considered time barred. Now, note in this case that a cause of action arises when that which should have been done is not done, or that which should not have been done is done. And the last case is the CIR versus United Salvage and Towage 729 is CRA 113. So the doctrine of this case is, it is clear that a taxpayer must be informed in writing of the legal and factual basis of the tax assessment made against him. The use of the word shall in these legal provisions indicates the mandatory nature of the requirements laid down therein. In the present case, a mere perusal of the fund for the deficiency for taxable year 1994 will show that other than a tabulation of the alleged deficiency tax due, and no further detail regarding the assessment was provided by the petitioner. Only the resulting interest, surcharge, and penalty were anchored with legal basis. So, petitioner should have at least attached a dating notice of discrepancy or stated an explanation why the amount of 48,000 is collectible against respondent and how the same was arrived at. Any shortcuts to the prescribed content of the assessment or the process thereof should not be countenanced. So that's all. Back to you, Sir William.
Salamat po, Attorney Leonora Maniwag. At patuloy pa rin po ang ating radio show na itanong mo sa ating tax expert lawyers sa 89.6 UC Law Radio. At merong nagpadala rito ng isang motivational quote about tax assessment. Ito ay galing sa isang ating sa nanonood magmula sa Tarlac. Yan. I won't mention his name. At ang sabi niya, the hardest thing in the world to understand is the income tax. Kasi mahirap daw magbayad. Kung makikita, lalabas ka, hindi na gagamit yung pera mo ng maayos. Ang kaya bulsa na pupunta. Anyway, eto ang oras po natin ay 42 minutes after 7 p.m. sa ating radio program. At patuloy po ang, syempre, priceless wisdom based on practice ng ating mga expert tax lawyers. Ngayon po, Attorney Lida Daniel. Attorney.
Yes, so muling binabati ko ang ating mga avid listeners. Marami pong salamat for supporting this program, and I'm also honored to answer some of your questions. So, merong isang listener na nagtatanong sa akin kasi hindi niya daw maintindihan yung case ng RCBC versus CIR, which was decided in last 2011. So, his question was, what was the issue, and gusto niyang i-expound daw natin tong case na to. So let me first start with the facts. So, first, petitioner RCBC is a general banking corporation, and it filed its annual corporate ITRs for the foreign currency deposit unit for the taxable years 94 to 95. So, and then a year later, RCBC received a letter of authority issued by responded CIR authorizing a special audit team to examine the former's book of accounts, records, and other documents for internal revenue taxes from January 1, 94 to December 95. So then on 97, RCBC executed 2 waivers of defense of prescription under the statute of limitations covering the taxable years of 94 and 95, thus extending the period for the BIR to assess up to the year 2000. So fast forward, so here the RCBC filed the protest together with relevant documentary evidence, and then on October 20, 2000, which was the reason of reinvestigation. So from 4.1 billion tax deficiency of RCBC, and it was reduced due to the reinvestigation to only 303 million. So, however, in this case, RCBC only paid 15.8 tax deficiency of RCBC from those past years, equivalent to 4.1 billion. So, nung nag-reinvestigation, only 303 million. But ang binayaran lang ng RCBC in this case is 15 million. And also, one of the arguments of RCBC is that the waiver is not valid on the ground that it was not signed by the CIR as required by Section 222B of the National Internal Revenue Code. So, So here, the main issue was, do petitioner RCBC is stopped from assailing the validity of the waivers. So here the Supreme Court said yes, because according to 1431 of the new civil code, it gives or disproved as against the person relying therefrom. A party is precluded from denying his own acts, admissions, or representations to the prejudice of the other party in order to prevent fraud and falsehood. And in this case, because here it is admitted that RCBC paid the partial payment of 15 million. So it impliedly admitted the validity of the waiver. So stop na siya kasi he paid partial payment of 15 million. So as evidence, RCBC even immediately paid the said deficiency tax receipt of the revised assessment on December 2000. Yun yung 15 million na binayaran niya. So here, the RCBC is stopped because RCBC made a partial payment. So I hope that answer your question to our avid listener. So his number is ending in 31. So listener, your phone number ending in 31. I hope it answer your question. Hopefully you will do well in your tax class. So we also have a question from our next listener. So marami tayong mga listener, mga talagang law student eh. They really want to understand the tax. And ito naman, pinapa-explain niya sa atin na naman yung case ng landmark case of Commissioner of Internal Revenue versus Dash Engineering Philippines, which was decided last 2013. So the facts of the case was respondent Dash Engineering Philippines filed its monthly and quarterly value-added tax returns for the period of January 1, 2003 to June 30, 2003. And on August 9, 2004, it filed a claim for tax credit or refund for the unutilized input value-added tax attributable to its zero-rated sales because petitioner commissioner of the Internal Revenue failed to act upon the said claim. Respondent was compelled to file a petition for review with the Court of Tax Appeals on 2005. CTA ruled in favor of Dash Engineering Philippines Incorporated, and because of this, the CIR, Commission of Internal Revenue, elevated the case to the Court of Tax Appeals and Bank. So from the division, it was appealed to the and Bank, averring the claim was filed out of time. So Dash Engineering Philippines Incorporated asserts that its petition was seasonably filed before the Court of Tax Appeals, in keeping with the 2-year prescriptive period provided for in Section 204, Paragraph C, and 229 of the National Internal Revenue Code. So the Court of Tax Appeals and Bank affirmed the decision of the Court of Tax Appeals Division ruling. So the main issue in this case was whether or not Dash Engineering Philippines Incorporated judicial claim was filed within the prescriptive period under the Section 112 of the Tax Code. So the Supreme Court held no. So here the Supreme Court explained that the 2-year period in Section 112 refers only to administrative claims. Section 204 and 229 of the National Internal Revenue Code pertain to the refund of erroneously, illegally collected tax. So wrong yung kiniklaim ng respondent here because it only refers to admin claims. However, the discussion here is it must pertain to the refund of erroneous or illegally collected taxes. So input VAT was not excessively collected as understood under Section 229 because at that time the input VAT is collected, the amount paid correct and proper. Hence, respondent cannot advance its position by referring to Section 222 because Section 112 is more specific and appropriate provision of law for claims for excess input VAT. petitioner is entirely correct in its assertion that compliance with the periods provided for about quoted provision is indeed mandatory and jurisdictional as affirmed in the court's ruling in San Roque, where the court and bank settled the controversy surrounding the application of the 120 days plus 30-day period provided in Section 112 of the National Internal Revenue Code and reiterated the Aichi doctrine that the 120 plus 30-day period is mandatory and jurisdictional. So therefore, also the Supreme Court explained that in accordance with the San Roque doctrine, respondents' judicial claim for refund must be denied for having filed late. So what we need to remember in this case is that this case extensively discusses the importance of filing your case on time, because if it's not filed on time, the court may have no jurisdiction to hear your case. So in adherence to the principles established in San Roque, Dash Engineering Philippines Incorporated judicial claim for a refund is denied due to its late filing, which resulted into the failure to meet the mandatory and jurisdictional requirements set forth in Section 112 of the NIR of the National Internal Revenue Code. So I hope that answer your question. The phone number of ending with 21. So thank you so much to number 21 for your question. I hope our discussion helped you understand further the prescriptive periods in taxation. Back to you, Sir William. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Attorney Lida Daniel. Maraming salamat at pinapasalamatan pala natin yung mga dumalo po sa ating free legal consultation, simple notarial service and assistance, a UC Legal Aid Clinic last November 11, 2023, 8 a.m. hanggang 12 p.m. sa Gate 3 BRS Building. Po naghihintay po sa staff po mismo straight sa opisina ni Senator RAFFY Tulfo. Yan, para pag-usapan na ating prescriptive period. Attorney RAFFY de Guzman, sir.
So thank you, Attorney Garado. So let's talk tax. Sabi ni Juan, wala munang RAFFY Tulfo in action. So mag-shift tayo sa RAFFY in action. We have here another case about deficiency. The case of Commissioner of Internal Revenue versus the La Flor de la Isabela Incorporation. So the respondent. So in this case, revolves around the La Flor's dispute with the Commissioner of Internal Revenue regarding the deficiency tax assessment for the taxable year 2005. So La Flor executed the waivers to extend the period of assessment, but the Court of Tax Appeals Division and the NBank ruled in favor of La Flor, stating that the assessment were barred by prescription. So these are the facts of the case. La Flor executed a waiver on September 3, 2008, and another on February 16, 2009, extending the assessment period for the taxable year 2005. On November 20, 2009, La Flor received a preliminary assessment notice for deficiency taxes for 2005. On January 7, 2010, La Flor received a formal letter of demand and final assessment notices for penalties and deficiencies assessment dated December 17, 2009. So LaFleur contested the assessment notice on January 15, 2010. The CIR issued the final decision on disputed assessment on July 20, 2010, leading LaFleur to file a petition for review before the uh, Court of Tax Appeals Division. So we have two issues here. The first is whether the prescriptive period under Section 203 of the NIRC applies to expanded withholding tax and withholding tax on compensation assessment. Second, whether LaFleur expanded the withholding tax and withholding tax on compensation assessment for 2005 were barred by prescription. So we have the CIR arguments. The CIR argument contends that the Section 203 of the NIRC does not apply to withholding agents like LaFleur. And he also argues that even if in Section 203 applies, the assessments had yet prescribed due to the waivers. So LaFleur arguments raises procedural issues against the CIR's petition, but also contested that the assessment had prescribed. So we have here the resolution of the court. According to the court, with the holding tax under Section 203, the court rejects the CIR's argument that withholding taxes are penalties and asserts that they fall under the Section 203 of the NIRC, allowing for a 3-year prescriptive period for assessment. In terms of prescription, since the waivers were deemed invalid, the court affirms that the assessment had indeed prescribed, upholding the decision of the Court of Tax Appeals Division and bank. So in conclusion, the court denies the CIR's petition affirming the decision of the Court of Tax Appeals. So we have here the next case of Commissioner of Internal Revenue versus Sony Philippines Incorporation. So in this case, the deficiency VAT assessment was canceled. The 5% holding tax on the commission expense was upheld. The deficiency assessment on the rental deposit was canceled, and the final withholding tax on royalties for January to March 1998. So these are the facts of the case. On November 24, 1998, the Commissioner of Internal Revenue issued the letter of authority number 19734, authorizing the examination of Sony's book of account for revenue taxes for the period 1997 and unverified prior years. So Sony protested a preliminary assessment for 1997 deficiency taxes and penalties issued on December 6, 1999. The CIR subsequently issued final assessment and notices, formal letter of demand, and details of discrepancies. So we have here the issue. The issue here is whether the commission expense of whether Sony is liable for deficiency VAT in the amount of 11,141,014.41 pesos. So according to the resolution of the court, the court found in no merit in the CIR's petition. So the deficiency VAT assessment was disallowed to the scope violation of letter of authority, which covered the period 1997 and unverified prior years. So the court emphasized that that a grant of authority is required before any examination or assessment, and the CIR Commissioner of Internal Revenue exceeded its authority. Regarding the commission expense, the court upheld the 5% withholding tax based on revenue regulation number 6-85 applicable during the examination period. So back to you, Sir William Garado, Attorney William.
Salamat po, Attorney Raffy de Guzman, at pinapakumusta ka na Attorney Garrett. At makikita ata kayo sa radio sa inyong TV station sa Manila, sa TV5. Ng dalawa pang kaso dito para for the benefit of our listeners and those who are watching now on social media.
So my last case po kasi it's based on the final assessment, the case of CIR Internal Revenue versus the Hantex. This case revolves around the allegation under the import of Hantex, leading to dispute between the Bureau of Custom. So these are the facts of the case. Hantex Trading, a Philippine-based company engaged in the selling of plastic products and importing synthetic plastic product. It faced allegation of under declaring its import. The Economic Intelligence and Investigation Bureau received information about the discrepancies in Hantex import declaration. So Hantex summoned to present its book field to do so, citing the termite damage to the original import document. So the Bureau relied on the certificate copies of the Hantex final statements and machine copies of consumption entries for its investigation. So though the Court of Appeals found Hantex liable for the tax deficiency, but the Court of Appeals deemed the deficiency assessment unlawful, arguing that the copies relied upon were not properly authenticated or verified by the responsible authorities. So the issue here is whether or not the final assessment of the petitioner against the respondent for deficiency income tax and sales tax for the later 1987 evidence and the law. So according to the resolution of the court, no, the Section 16 of NIRC of 1977 as amended provides that the Commissioner of Internal Revenue has the power to make assessments and prescribe additional requirements for tax administration and enforcement. Among such power are those provided in paragraph B of Section 16, which provides that failure to submit the required returns, statements, reports, and other documents. So these are my last case, Sir William. Back to you, sir. Attorney William.
Salamat po, Attorney Raffy de Guzman, at pinapakumusta ka na Attorney Garrett. At makikita ata kayo sa radio sa inyong TV station sa Manila, sa TV5. Oras po natin ay 2 minutes after 8. Pinapasalamatan po natin ang ating mga list of sponsors for tonight, ang Jollibee Session Road. Tara na, kain na sa Jollibee Session Road. At special thanks din po sa Mercury Drugstore. Maraming salamat sa ating community outreach nakaraan. At ngayon po, bago po tayo magpatuloy sa ating itanong mo sa ating mga experts pagdating sa taxes, bibigyan po natin ng pagkakataon na bumati po, na mag-greet ang ating mga lawyers. Unahin po natin sa Attorney LIDA. Attorney, baka meron po kayo dyan mga greetings, Attorney.
Yes, so thank you so much sa mga listeners natin tonight, and I would just like to shout out sa mga kabatch ko natin sa University of the Cordilleras Section B. Gusto ko lang pong batiin sila. Hindi ko na po sila may isa-isa kasi ang rami nila. Ang rami nating solid Section B. Thank you so much sa listeners again natin for listening. Mag-send lang tayo ng mga questions nyo. Nandito lang kami. We still have time. Thank you so much, Sir Garado.
Salamat po, Attorney LIDA. Attorney GOROSPE. Ma'am.
So, ayan nga po, meron pang nagpahabol na magtanong sa ating listeners. Meron pa. Tinatanong nila dito kung ano yung basic questions, kung paano daw, kung waiver daw ba ay valid, kung yung sa 3-year period to assess internal revenue na-prescribe na ba. Ayan yung mga ganyang tanong. So, ihahabol ko pa po yung itong case para sa nagtanong na to. Sa case na CIR versus FMF, Development Corporation. So in here, yung waiver in question dito may defect, and it did not validly extend the original 3-year prescriptive period. So una, kaya siya hindi umabot, it was not proven that the respondent was furnished a copy of the BIR accepted waiver. Second is the waiver was signed only by the revenue district officer when it should have been yung commissioner. And lastly, it did not contain the date of acceptance by the Commissioner of Internal Revenue, wherein itong waiver na to was validly accepted before the expiration of the original 3-year period, kaya requisite siya and necessary. So, question, in Section 203 of the NIRC, internal revenue taxes must be assessed within 3 years, counted from the period fixed by the law for the filing of the tax return or the actual date of filing, whichever is later. Is there an exception to the general rule? So, in here, merong exception. An exception to the 3-year prescriptive period on the assessment of taxes is Section 222 paragraph B of the NIRC. The above provision authorizes the extension of the original 3-year period by the execution of valid waiver where the taxpayer and the BIR agreed in writing that the period to issue an assessment and collect taxes due is extended to an agreed upon date. So una, the waiver must be in form of identified as Annex A. And second, the waiver shall be signed by the taxpayer himself or his duly authorized representative. In case of a corporation, the waiver must be signed by any of its responsible officials. Third, the following revenue officials are authorized to sign the waiver. Sa una, pag National Office, Commissioner for Tax, cases involving na more than 1 million. And regional offices, the Revenue District Officer with respect to tax cases still pending investigation and the period to assess is about to prescribe regardless of amount. And second, the waiver must be executed in 3 copies. The second copy for the taxpayer, and the fact of receipt by the taxpayer of his or her file copy shall be indicated in the original copy. So these procedures shall be strictly followed. Any revenue official found not to have complied with this order resulting in prescription of the right to assess or collect shall be administratively dealt with. So, meron pa isang nagtanong sa akin, paano daw kapag mayroong 10-year prescriptive period of tax assessment, paano daw siya mai-apply? So, dito, isa-cite ko yung case ng Republic of the Philippines versus the GMCC United Development Corporation. So, for the 10-year period under Section 222, Paragraph 8 to apply, it is not enough that fraud is alleged in the complaint. It must be established by clear and convincing evidence that the petitioner, having failed to discharge the burden of proving fraud, it cannot invoke Section 222, Paragraph 8. Having settled that the case falls under 203 of the tax code, the 3-year prescriptive period should be applied. So in GMCC's case, the last day prescribed by law for filing its 1998 tax return was April 15, 1999. So the petitioner had 3 years until 2002 to make an assessment. Since the preliminary assessment was made only December 8, 2003, the period of to assess the tax already prescribed. A reading of Section 203 will show that it prohibits two acts after the expiration of the 3-year period. First, an assessment for the collection of taxes in return, and second, initiating a court proceeding on the basis of such return. The state prosecutor then was correct in dismissing the complaint of tax evasion, since it was clear that the prescribed return cannot be used as basis for the case. So in here, the petitioner failed to prove that respondent officers willfully intended to evade paying tax. Moreover, having found no basis to disregard the 3-year period of prescription, it is clear that the assessments were issued beyond the statutes of this limitation. So, sana nasagot po natin yung tanong ninyo sa ganitong case. Back to you, Sir William.
Salamat po, Attorney Gorospe. At marami po mga pagbati po sa inyo, Attorney Gorospe po dito. At isang katanungan po dito, ano daw po ang plano nyo ngayong darating na Christmas? Marami na wala mag-Christmas ngayon.
Ayan. Sana maging masaya na lang po ang lahat. Ang wish ko na lang po, pasado ang lahat.
Ayun. Madin po yan pasadong lahat.
Christmas wish.
Tama po yan. At Attorney Maniwag, may greetings po kayo dyan, ma'am, para po sa inyong mga kasama sa trabaho, sa inyong opisina, ma'am.
Ang sabi nila, magagaling daw yung mga nag-discuss ngayon. So, thank you very much for listening. And
salamat po, Attorney
may tanong
Maniwag.
din dito na yes.
And ano pong katanungan po yan, Attorney Maniwag?
Ang tanong nila is kung applicable ba ang prescriptive period for the assessment or the tax assessment sa 10-year period or 3-year period. Ang masasabi ko naman is ibase ko na lang doon sa case ni Republic of the Philippines represented by Bureau of Internal Revenue versus United Development Corporation. Now, in this case, a reading of Section 203 will show that it prohibits two acts after the expiration of 3-year period. First, an assessment for the collection of taxes and the return, and second, initiating a court proceeding on the basis of such return. The state prosecutor was correct in dismissing the complaint for tax evasion, since it was clear that the prescribed return cannot be used as basis for the case. The facts of this is that on March 28, 2003, the Bureau of Internal Revenue National Investigation Division issued a letter of authority. So, authorizing its revenue officers to examine the books of accounts and other accounting records of GMCC United Development Corporations, covering taxable years 1998 and 1999. On April 3, 2003, GMCC was reserved a copy of said letter of authority and was requested to present its book of accounts and other accounting records. Now, GMCC failed to respond to the letter of authority as well as the subsequent letters requesting that it records in documents be produced. So the issue here is 10-year period or 3-year period prescriptive period for the tax assessment. The ruling of the Supreme Court is the Court of Appeals committed no reversible error in affirming the ruling of the Secretary of Justice that there was no probable cause to file a tax evasion case against the respondent officers, since the assessment for the tax had already prescribed no proceeding in court on the basis of such return can be filed. Now, in ruling that there was no probable cause to indict, so both the state prosecutor and the Court of Appeals emphasized that if respondents really intended to evade payment, they would have omitted the asset transaction completely in all financial statement. So hopefully, ang tanong ninyo. Back to you, Sir William.
Salamat po, Attorney Maniwag, sa inyong enlightenment po. At alam niyo po yung may isang katanungan dito, yung landmark case din ata ito, yung Oceanic Wireless Network versus CIR. Yung pinag-usapan po rito yung power daw po ng commissioner to make assessments and prescribe additional requirements for tax administration and enforcement. At ang facts of the case po rito, what went on behind the scenes. Yung Oceanic Wireless Network challenges yung authority ng Chief of the Accounts Receivable and Billing Division ng BIR, National Office, to decide finally on protests against disputed tax deficiency assessments. Now, Oceanic received deficiency tax assessments for 1984 from the BIR, and despite filing a protest, the Chief of the BIR Accounts Receivable and Billing Division reiterated the assessments, prompting Oceanic to file a petition for review with the Court of Tax Appeals. Now, yung CTA dismissed the petition, citing a demand letter as the final decision of the Commissioner of Internal Revenue. Oceanic argued that the demand letter signed by a subordinate should not be considered final. Sa ating mga manonood, ano daw po naging issue ng kasong to? Ang pinag-usapan po rito yung whether a demand letter daw po for tax deficiency assessments issued and signed by a subordinate officer acting on behalf of the Commissioner of Internal Revenue is deemed final and subject to appeal. At ang decision naman ng korte, itong pinakamalaga, no? Ang decision ay yes. Yung Commissioner daw po ng Internal Revenue may delegate powers, but the delegation excludes 4 specific powers. The act of issuing a demand letter falls within, the so-called yung powers na pwedeng ma-delegate. At ang demand letter signed ng Chief mismo ng Accounts Receivable and Billing Division is considered final and executory unless appealed within 30 days. At yung Oceanic na po failed to appeal within this period, making the decision final, executory, and demandable. The lack of the Commissioner's signature on the demand letter, walang pirma, does not invalidate its finality. The Court of Tax Appeals would have been the proper venue for appeal. I'm scrolling down yung mga messages po ngayon at may isang mahalagang katanungan dito, yung kaso daw po ng CIR versus Kudus Metal Corporation. Itong case na to was way back May 2010. Yan. Anong ibig sabihin ng Kudus? Pag sinabing Kudus, K-U-D-O-S. Yung Kudus Metal Corporation filed its annual income tax return. Ngayon nangyari po rito, yung BIR advised KMC, yung Kudus Metal Corporation, that it will be subjected to a tax audit. But hindi, no? Nag-file pero ita-tax audit daw po. At yung Sabina Duces Ticom, they were asked to bring all their documents. Right? Ano na-issue sa kanila. Ngayon, yung KMC was not able to comply. Kaya about 4 months before yung expiration mismo ng gobyerno to make the assessment, Nelia Pasco, we're talking about the accountant ng KMC, executed a waiver of the statute of limitations or SOL in favor of BIR. A tax audit then ensued. Nagkaroon ng auditing. Now, to cut the long story short, yung waiver mismo executed by Pasco, the audit continued. And finally, more than 3 years from the filing of KMC of its ITR, income tax return, lumabas po yung formal assessment notice ng Commissioner of Internal Revenue demanding KMC to pay how many millions? 25 million pesos in taxes. Mabigat yan, 25 million in taxes. Now, the company, KMC, protested on the ground that it was issued beyond the so-called prescriptive period and that it was issued beyond because there was no valid waiver or tinatawag na first waiver because Pasco was not authorized by KMC to execute the same, that even if Pasco, yung accountant ng KMC is authorized, the same is still void because it did not indicate the acceptance date of the BIR, that a copy of the waiver was not furnished to KMC. Now, yung CIR argued, kapagtalo po ngayon, that KMC is already in estoppel because it did not or it allowed the audit conducted by the BIR after the 2 waivers executed by Pasco. Ang tanong, whether or not KMC is stopped daw po. Sabi nga po ng isang manonood, tama-tama, yan ang issue po rito. Ang sabi ng korte, hindi po pwede. Apparently, Pasco was not authorized by KMC to execute yung tinatawag na waiver mismo. Now, even if KMC allowed the subsequent tax audit after such waiver, did not bar KMC from raising the defense of prescription. Napakahalaga talaga ng prescription. Now, reinforcing the fact that the waiver is infirm because of the lack of the date of acceptance, as well as the fact that a copy thereof was not furnished to KMC. Now, these two are among the requirements provided by Section 222 of the NIRC as to a valid waiver of the SOL. Now, yung provisions na po ng Section 222 of NIRC provides for a detailed procedure that must be strictly followed by the BIR in order the taxpayer will have a valid waiver. Now, yung BIR cannot now hide behind the doctrine of estoppel to cover its failure to comply with the law. I hope yung ating mga nagtatanong ng kasong po yan dalawa, we were able to answer based sa decision mismo ng Supreme Court. Attorney RAFFY de Guzman, sir, kumusta na po sa opisina po na Senator RAFFY? Kailan ba siya aakyat ng Baguio?
Actually, this week, meron silang schedule dito sa Baguio para bisitahin yung opisina natin dito sa La Trinidad.
Wow!
We are inviting you na pumunta po sa opisina ni Attorney RAFFY Tulfo in action. Yan.
Galing talaga. Magpa-picture tayo kay Senator. Attorney, may mga katanungan po sa inyo rito, yung more on prescription. Pwede daw po kayo magbigay ng dalawa pang kaso dito para for the benefit of our listeners and those who are watching now on social media.
So, my last case po kasi, it's based on the final assessment, the case of CIR Internal Revenue versus the Hantex. This case revolves around the allegation under the import of Hantex, leading to dispute between the Bureau of Custom. So these are the facts of the case. Hantex Trading, a Philippine-based company engaged in the selling of plastic products and importing synthetic plastic product, it faced allegation of under declaring its import. The Economic Intelligence and Investigation Bureau receive information about the discrepancies in Hantex import declaration. So Hantex summoned to present its book failed to do so, citing the termite da- termite damage to the original import document. So the Bureau relied on the certificate copies of the Hantex final statements and machine copies of consumption entries for its investigation. So, though the Court of Appeals found Hantex liable for the tax deficiency, but the Court of Appeals deemed the deficiency assessment unlawful, arguing that the copies relied upon were not properly authenticated or verified by the responsible authorities. So the issue here is whether or not the final assessment of the petitioner against the respondent for deficiency income tax and sales tax for the later 1987 evidence and the law. So according to the resolution of the court, no, the section 16 of NIRC of 1977 as amended provides that the Commissioner of Internal Revenue has the power to make assessments and prescribe additional requirements for tax administration and enforcement. Among such power are those provided in paragraph B of section 16, which provides that failure to submit the required returns, statements, reports, and other documents. So these are my last case, Sir William. Back to you, sir.
Salamat po, Attorney RAFFY Tulfo. RAFFY de Guzman. Maraming salamat. At ito nga pala, pasalamat din po tayo sa City Government of Baguio. Yan, sa inyong partnership whenever we would hold the legal aid clinics. At ngayon naman po, makasama po natin, siyempre, si Attorney LIDA Daniel sa usaping prescriptive periods. And Attorney LIDA, ang dami na nagpapakamusta kay Attorney LIDA ngayon. Daniel.
Yes. Thank you so much sa mga textmates natin. Overwhelming yung mga support nyo. Please, wag po kayong mag-send ng mga fake, mga nanalo kayo ng ganito, mga kung ano-ano. Please be reminded of the SIM Registration Act. Bagong batas natin.
Please be reminded that meron silang tax pag nanalo sila.
Yes. Yes, pag nanalo kayo, pwede kayong matax. Depends on the amount. So, meron tayong mga masugid na textmates, talagang interested sila dito sa topic na to, dito sa hindi namang bagong case, but this is a recent case in the case of Commissioner of Internal Revenue versus Systems Technology Institute Incorporated, decided last 2017. So here shortcut ko na, i-summarize ko na since we are malapit na pong matapos ang ating programa ngayong gabi. So here in this case the Supreme Court ruled that waivers extending the prescriptive period of tax assessments must be compliant with the order and must indicate the nature and the amount of tax due to it. So here, these requirements are mandatory and must strictly be followed. To be sure, in the number of cases, this court did not hesitate to strike down waivers which failed to strictly comply with the provisions of the orders. So here, the Supreme Court, the doctrine here is that the Supreme Court held that no valid assessment period waiver if tax kind amount not shown. So in this case, the Supreme Court held that waivers that fail to indicate the specific tax involved and the exact amount of the tax to be assessed or collected are material, as there can be no true and valid agreement between the taxpayer and the CIR absent this information. So I hope that our sino ba tong textmate na to, his phone number is ending in 10. So thank you so much to our textmate number 10 for your answer. Hopefully na enlighten ka dito sa latest jurisprudence from the Supreme Court.
Salamat po, Attorney Lida. At meron pa po tayong 10 minutes sa ating radio show po ngayon. Mag-entertain po tayo ng mga questions. Okay, subukan po nating sagutin yung mga questions na galing sa ating mga manonood ngayon. Okay. At okay. Kukunin po natin yung sasabihin ng ating mga guest po ngayon. Ayun po, no? Merong katanungan dito, Sir Raffy, para po sa inyo. Saan ho daw ba matatagpuan yung BIR dito sa Baguio, Sir Raffy? Yan, merong nagtatanong po ngayon.
Ang BIR po sa Baguio was located at the Upper Session Road po.
Okay, so malapit lang yan, no, sa Upper Session Road. Okay.
Yes,
meron pa ritong katanungan para kay Attorney Gorospe. Ito, attorney. Meron ata nag-send sa inyong messenger, attorney. Yun sa messenger. Itanong natin kay attorney rito. Yan, basahin nga po natin ang katanungan. Yun. Sabi rito, are we not supposed to improve first the tax administration before imposing new taxes? Ito, were there administrative reforms included under the train law? Ano ba to, attorney? Medyo mabigat to, Kita natin kay Attorney Gorospe.
So ito nga ang kasagutan sa ganyang tanong. So under the leadership of the BIR, Commissioner si Cesar Billy Dulay, several administrative reforms have been implemented. So from the continuous streamlining of processes and documentary requirements for registration to the processing of tax clearance and review of all pending audit cases, which is perceived to be a source of corruption. Ngayon, in fact, in partnership with the Center for Strategic Reforms of the Philippines, or the CSR Philippines, the BIR has launched the Seal of Honesty, or SOH, certification program, and has released the tax guide for small businesses to promote tax education and reform, thus upholding integrity and honesty in paying taxes. So visit nyo na lang yung site ng Seal of Honesty para sa iba pang informations. So ito naman kung under sa train law. Under the train law, there are administrative reforms included which will simply compliance for taxpayers. So from a 12-page income tax return, it has been reduced to only 4 pages. So the deadline for the filing of first quarters ITRs was moved from April 15 to May 15, effective 2018. However, the deadline for filing annual income tax return shall still be on or before April 15. The second installment of annual income tax was moved from July 15 to October 15. So taxpayers with gross annual sales receipts amounting to 3 million pesos and below are exempt from having their books of accounts and financial statements audited by independent certified public account. So, ayun po.
Salamat po, attorney. At may katanungan po rito para kay Attorney Lida. Ito, Attorney Lida, itong katanungan mo ngayon. Paano naman yung mga sa ordinary na mga empleyado like me, a call center agent, earning a monthly salary of 21,000 pesos? Ano daw po mga benepisyo can I expect from the train law? At kailan po siya naging effective? Oh, may mga call center agents po nanonood ngayon. Itanong po natin Attorney Lida.
Yes. Thank you so much to our avid textmate. Marami pong salamat sa pagsusuporta. So, the key component, to answer your question, dear textmate, the key component of the train law is the lowering of personal income tax and exempting the first 250,000 income of all individuals, or if your salary is equivalent to 20,833.33 monthly salary. So exempted kayo from any income tax. So the BRR cannot tax you. This law is effective in January 1, 2018, which means that all employees must receive higher take. So this essentially means that if you're an employee earning this kind of salary below 20,833.33, you will receive a higher take-home pay starting that month. So 2018 pa to effective. So also in addition to our micro entrepreneurs, so katulad ko, we previously we owned a sari-sari store. So for example, if you're sari-sari store owner or an entrepreneur or whatever, earning annual gross sale of only 500,000. So meron na namang text pala, sorry. So I hope that answer your question. So may text na naman dito si dear textmate. Sabi niya ng isang textmate pala. So may nagtatanong na micro entrepreneur. So meron siyang sari-sari store earning only an annual gross sales of 500,000. So how much tax ang babayaran ko? So will there any be tax savings or benefit from the train law? So yun yung tanong ni textmate. Hindi ko yata alam yung sagot dito. Any of our dear panelists, dear kababayan, dear tax experts answer this question, yung question ni sari-sari store owner.
Ayun, hinihintay po natin mismo yung taga-BIR na dumating.
Yes.
Para i-answeran po yan.
I'm not very particular kasi sa mga entrepreneurs.
Ayan, yun yung sa
ma-answer na expert natin sa BIR.
Tama yung computation. Actually, meron tayong ipa-flash natin sa screen yung computation. Tignan nga natin kung paano tong computation na to. Tungkol sa sari-sari store. Ito pinadala po sa atin ng ating mga kaibigan sa BIR. Ito daw po yung sari-sari store owner. Yung tingnan po natin, no? Yung nandiyan po yung gross receipt, the train law. Bibigyan po namin kayo ng copy tungkol dito. Yan. Ang kailangan ata mag-explain dito ay mismong accountant. But anyway, bibigyan po natin kayo ng copy para sa katanungan po yan. Maraming salamat po when it comes to computation. I guess, Ma'am Attorney GOROSPE, merong isang mahalagang kaso na itinanong sa inyo kanina, no? Ng listener sa inyong messenger. Ano bang kaso yan, Attorney GOROSPE?
Meron pang isang pahabol. So, patungkol na naman to sa 5 years, 3 years ng collection of internal revenue sa statute of limitation. So, again, ano ko siya sa case na alam ko, which is yung CIR versus the United Salvage and Towage. In here, the statute of limitations on assessment and collection of national internal revenue taxes was shortened from 5 years to 3 years by virtue of Batas Pambansa bilang 700. Thus, itong si petitioner has 3 years from the date of actual filing of the tax return to assess a national internal revenue tax or to commence court proceedings for the collection thereof without an assessment. However, when it validly issues an assessment within 3-year period, it has another 3 years within which to collect the tax due by distraint, levy, or court proceeding. The assessment of the tax is deemed made, and the 3-year period for the collection of the assessed tax begins to run on the date the assessment notice had been released, mailed, or sent to the taxpayer. So no evidence was formally offered to prove when the United Salvage and Towage filed its returns and paid the corresponding taxable year 1992. So nevertheless, as correctly held by the CTAN Bank, the preliminary collection letter for the deficiency taxes for taxable year 1992 was only issued on February 2002, despite the fact that the deficiency for taxable year 1992 was issued as clearly as January 1996. So clearly, yung 5 long years had already lapsed beyond the 3 years prescriptive period before the collection was pursued by the petitioner. So further, while the request for a reinvestigation was made on March 1997, the same was only acted upon by the petitioner on January 2001. Also, beyond 3 years statute limitations reckoned from January 1996, notwithstanding the lack of impediment to rule upon such issue. So, the right of the government to collect tax does not prescribe. However, in fairness to the taxpayer, the government should be stopped from collecting the tax where it failed to make the necessary investigation and assessment within the 5-year after the filing of the return, and where it failed to collect the tax within 5 years from the date of assessment thereof. Just as the government is interested in the stability of its collections, so also are the taxpayers entitled to an assurance that they will not be subjected to further investigation for tax purposes after the expiration of a reasonable period of time. So, yun po yung last case.
Salamat po. At ngayon po merong katanungan para kay Attorney Maniwag. Attorney Maniwag, eto sisingin po natin. Galing sa isang concerned citizen daw po kasi laki-laki ng kanyang binabayaran. Attorney Maniwag, ang katanungan, ano daw po ang main purpose ng taxation sa Pilipinas?
Okay. Thank you, Sir William. As far as I know, the Philippine government relies on tax revenue and its tax revenue is part of the country's policy.
Salamat po, Attorney Maniwag. At syempre, in closing po sa atin, no, mula sa opisina ni Attorney Senator RAFFY Tulfo, anong may papayo nyo, Attorney de Guzman, sa ating mga manonood po ngayon, no, yung ating mga taxpayers po?
Yung sabi nga pa nila na yung mga nagpapanggap diyan ng mga nanalo na kayong mga nanalo ng malalaki. Baka mamaya kayo taksan kayo mabibigla kayo tapos sabihin niyo ay hindi pala ako nanalo. Dapat maging aware tayo sa mga taxes natin. Kaya yun, sabi ni Ma'am Leonora na um, taxes is the lifeblood of the government. Hindi lang naman dito sa Philippines, kundi lahat yan eh. Sa lahat ng countries, yan ang bumubuhay sa atin. Wala tayong tulay pagka walang taxes. Walang mga sweldong mga empleyado ng government pag walang taxes. Yun po. Be aware of our taxes po.
Diyan po nagtatapos ang panibagong edisyon ng Itanong Mo sa ating tax expert lawyer sa 89.6 UC Law Radio. At malaking pasalamat po kay Attorney GOROSPE, Attorney MANIWAG, Attorney GUZMAN, at Attorney LIDA on behalf of our radio program. Ito po si Attorney Garado na nagpapaalam sa inyong lahat. Kung meron kang problema, itanong mo sa ating mga magagaling na lawyers galing sa 89.6 UC Law Radio. Happy weekend. Goodbye.